Hi everyone, I am recording a screencast video lecture for Module 4, which is work you should already have started doing starting on this last Friday. And I have right here, so I usually do screencast lectures every week in my writing and literature classes, but never in my tech writing classes, just due to the nature of the work. But I wanted to do a screencast in particular for Module 4 because there's quite a lot of work that is being asked of you this week. So I just want to kind of go through it and clarify it. And then I'm also going to talk about the readings for this week. So these are my objectives for this screencast video lecture, which is on so chapters 3 and 6 are part of the reading from the textbook this week. I'm going to go through the assignments, and then I'll probably just talk briefly about what rhetoric is, because there's a lot of things that are being asked of you to be aware of in terms of your own rhetorical intentions and doing technical writing. And I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what that means, and it has to do, it comes up, it's not explicitly talked about in chapter 3, which is called Writing Ethically, but the subtext is all about rhetorical intentions, and it's the same thing in chapter 6. Chapter 6 is about the illustrations and design. They don't talk about rhetoric, but the subtext is it's all rhetoric. So the choices that, in terms of what illustrations you would choose or what graphs or, for data viz, that there's all rhetorical intentions that go into how you choose to be ethically effective, to establish your own ethos as a writer and somebody who's presenting data, or somebody who's writing, for example, an instruction manual and those types of things. So I'm first going to go to our Canvas course. I did want to just show, in case anyone hasn't, so I'm just in modules right now, and if anyone's having trouble locating the PowerPoints that I've been uploading, they're under this, they're all individually called modules, but this one is called Handouts and Resources, and then you can see I've got them all up. And I've uploaded chapter 3 and chapter 6, which is for this week, and this all comes right before module 1. But for module 4, it's a lot of, it's nothing major. There's no like major writing assignments. It's all just these kind of little smaller assignments, and then you have these 2 quizzes. One's on clauses and one's on phrases. And I've done video lectures on grammar before, because clauses and phrases are 2 of the most important things to talk about in terms of grammar. So I'll probably either share a video lecture I've done on that or record a new one. But so you want to make sure that you do these quizzes. If you have any technical problems with them, please let me know. And then this constitutes the reading assignments for this particular module. You could see, right, chapter 3 and chapter 6, writing ethically and designing illustrations. And then it also asks you to take a look at the periodic table of visualization methods. I just call visualization biz, so it's just in the industry it's easier. So this is the periodic table of viz methods, so which is a really nice thing to do, because so it's got it all organized by color in terms of, what exactly do you want the visualization to do, right? Are you trying to visualize data? Are you visualizing information? Are you visualizing a concept, a strategy, a metaphor, a compound? All right, the different things. So then it goes through, and if you hover over any of them, they give you the examples of what that particular type of visualization looks like. So it's pretty handy, and you're going to want to use this for this week for at least one that final assignment for this week. And then the other thing is that you were asked to look at this scholarly article. This is a scholarly peer-reviewed article from Technical Communication is the name of the journal, and it's about cruel pies. So this idea of, ineffective visualization. So you can, I personally didn't think it was written very well, but it does make some notable points, particularly in this idea of the humanistic ethic of visuals, and this idea that viewing technical communication as a humanistic field, because tech comm is a really interesting discipline in itself. So, for example, I'm a literature person, so I'm a humanist, but in English departments, which house things like literature, creative writing, and then they also house, more newly within the last 50 years, rhetoric and composition. And within rhetoric and composition, there's a subfield of technical communication. And so the technical communication is this kind of straddling discipline because it's about writing, so it's humanistic, but then it also is tech writing, so it's writing in specific fields that are not necessarily humanistic. So it kind of falls into both of these categories. So for example, so I'm not a tech writer. I know a lot of tech writers and tech comm people, and they work in things like legal work, or the other one is like climate change, for example, how you analyze data that has to do with weather, or how you analyze data that has to do, or not just analyze it, but how you present it. How do you write about it? And then how do you present that information? And then what these people do is that they go through and they talk about those kind of ethical situations. So is the way this information presented about, for example, climate change, is it being presented in an ethical and fair way? How are they using the data and the statistics? Why are they using it that way? So those are some of the things that you're being asked to do this week with that case study. And so those are the two things you were asked to read in addition to the 2 chapters. And then you were asked to view this TED Talk, which I've read everything, and I also viewed the TED Talk. And the TED Talk, I'm just going to kind of give a few notes. I don't have to do that. I'll just pull the Word doc back up. But the TED Talk, and I just want to refer back to the title of the TED Talk, The Story, Imagery, and Art of the 21st Century Presentation. I'm sorry, I'm pausing because I have conflicting responses to it. I'm not a fan personally of the TED Talk format itself, so I already was kind of biased when I went to watch it, but that's kind of beside the point. But that also has to do with expectations and managing the expectations of the audience and the viewer. So this TED Talk, the speaker, is his name Gar? I can't remember. Sorry, the short-term memory is really bad. Yeah, Gar Reynolds. So he talks about the kind of, what constitutes effective presentation. And he talks about this long debated argument. It's nothing new, about throwing away the slide presentations. And this is something that, and as a professor, a lot of what he talked about is very similar to what we're taught as teachers, like what's called pedagogy, so how we choose to teach. And so it was very similar. And so this argument of what type of format do I present information to my audience? And he talks about schools, right? So my audience includes my students when I'm doing things like lecturing, and which I'm doing right now because it's an online course there's not really not way I can get all of us in the same room. That is impossible. But it's not a new argument. So about do away with PowerPoint, and then Prezi came along, and then people were like, do away with Prezi, and and he talks about that in his TED Talk, and then he talks about, that vision is the most powerful sense, and kind of this idea of how do we optimize this sense. You're going to have to see me type, and I will type wrong sometimes. How do we optimize this sense when giving presentations, or presenting ideas or data to audiences? I personally found that a little bit ableist, which means that right away he's saying this isn't for blind people. So I kind of had a little bit of an issue with that. But he then tries to capitalize on this idea of, we are storytellers. And he really focuses his presentation on this idea of you can present data and stats, statistics and information and arguments and all that stuff. But the most important thing is to connect with the audience. And, because by connecting with the audience, this arguably leads to increased meaning making for the audience, and therefore they're left with more informational currency, so to speak. But he talks about, and then so he talks a lot about the kind of standard lecture format, giving that example of I don't remember if it was a president or a CEO or somebody. It was somebody in a high position who was giving a presentation, and he talks about how the person never left the podium. And again, that's something we're taught as teachers, that you really do want to leave the podium. And really what we're taught, and I agree with this in multiple contexts, is that you need a mixture of things, and that has to do with the attention level and focus theories in terms of how long can an audience be captivated. So, for example, in online classes, like that I'm teaching with you guys, we're told that the average adult's attention span is 15 minutes. And that could be true. I'm a very focused person, so I've never had an issue with focus. So for me, I can listen to somebody for, I think I could probably go through like 2 hours. And after that, I'm cognitively drained at that point. But so we're taught to, and it's not that unusual because I've heard it before, not just in teaching online, but also, in face-to-face classes, that every 15 minutes you should do something else, which is really hard to do as a teacher, especially with my teaching style, which it doesn't work well because I'm not a lesson plan instructor. So, but he talks about this idea of the standard lecture, and we should move away from the podium. This doesn't really apply to us because this is an online class, and it's not like I'm asking you to get up and perform a speech or something like that, or do any debates or anything like that in front of the class. But, and then at the end of his presentation, he talks about kind of video versus photography, and then this idea of, that the projector is an emotion generator. So he's kind of coining phrases, so to speak, and that the projector is the emotion machine. I'm getting his things wrong. And that motion pictures, so not a static image, are emotion generators. And that all has to do with going back to that idea of how do you have an in-depth connection with your audience, whether it's a reader or a viewer. Because the more you can do that, the more you can cognitively engage through presenting fair and ethical data and arguments, right, which develop your ethos as a writer or presenter. And then, that the audience is going to be more willing to digest what you're saying. So there were a lot of parts through the video where I was having not positive responses to what he was saying, and that's for a variety of reasons. But and I could make arguments about it, but we're not really doing arguments, so there's no point in getting to that through modeling. And then I think the last kind of notable takeaway from this is he talks about, like, while content is king, ideas are key rather than text. That there's been kind of this erroneous correlation between content and text, that content has to equal text. And again, I was like, I don't know where you're getting your information from. This has been going on for like decades. We know that context is not text. And that ideas, yes, are the key thing. So I'm not really sure who the audience is or was for Gar Reynolds in this particular presentation, which is why I may have been having bad negative responses to what he was saying, because I may not have been I may not be in what he considered his audience. So that's a very likely thing. He seemed to talk a lot about salarymen, I think. I was like, what about the women? But, people who are, in meetings and presentations, or viewing presentations in meetings all the time, that kind of thing. So that was the TED Talk. So hopefully it was helpful to you, and I hope that you all had more positive reactions to it than I did. But like I said, I just don't think that I'm the best audience member or viewer for that particular type of conversation. But I'm going to first, because I want to do that, like try to change things around a little bit. But I'm going to go back to the modules and go through some of the assignments that you have for this week. I'm just going to go back because I'm already in modules. So, and I have module 4 open. And like I said, you have those quizzes. I looked at this. This was the reading. And then you have this reflection. So reflection is going to be a common thing that you see throughout this course. Oops, I clicked on the same thing. Sorry. My apologies. That was the reading. I wanted to click on the reflection. So the reflection on designing visuals. So here is where you go specifically to that periodic table. So this document here, where the link is provided for you under reading. And so you choose one of those data viz methods and then post a memo 100 words or less. So it's short, but you want to maintain your memo format. And then sorry, I was like, where's the instructions? It's so short. And then what you're doing is you're describing a potential ethical concern with the style, with its style of representation. So you would go to, say for example, I was like, okay, knowledge map. That's going to be the viz method that I'm choosing. This is a compound visualization. So I would talk about, and you don't have to talk about the specific examples that they provide. I wouldn't do that. What I would focus on is, if I were to provide a knowledge map of something, what would be the potential ethical concerns that I would have to be aware of as the person presenting the information in whatever format, to make sure that it fits within ethical boundaries and it doesn't cross those boundaries. So again, how would that particular visualization method present ethical problems to me if I were to choose that as a way to visualize information? So that's what the this reflection is on designing visuals. So you want to do that. That's a complete or incomplete. And you don't have to do any responses for that one. And then you have the case study is just something that you read through, and then you in other assignments you respond to it. So it gives you this information, or excuse me, this case study about how this manager or supervisor reaches out to this one employee and says like, hey, these 3 people provided me with this data viz, and it's just, they're not, and then the 3 examples are here. And basically the supervisor says to the person, like, you're really good at, providing ethical, concise, readable, accessible visualizations of data and information. Can you please revise these to do that? And then it talks about how that employee then kind of reaches out to each of the 3 people, her 3 colleagues, and they were, asking them like, what was your goal in doing this visualization? And they tell her, and then that's kind of the whole case study. And then it tells you down here, right? Okay, you're going to reflect back to this case study in the data viz memo, and then the viz redesign with the reflection memo. And that's why the reflections can get confusing, because I've had questions from a number of students where they say, is the reflection the same as the other reflection? Because sometimes you're doing 2 reflections in a module, and they are always different. They're 2 distinct reflections. So that's just the case study. It's just kind of, you need to know this information in order to reflect back on it. And then you can read through this. This one is just a, hey, heads up, there's a tech report coming. But these are the other 2 assignments for this week. And this one is the rhetorical reflection memo. And again, like I said, it can get confusing because there's this reflection, there's the rhetorical reflection, and then you have the viz redesign with the reflection memo. It's a lot of reflection. So I presume that it could get confusing, which is partly why I wanted to do this screencast video lecture. But the rhetorical reflection memo is, right, you're composing another memo. It's 150 words, so it's a little bit longer than the other assignment, that clearly and concisely clearly and concisely articulates what you believe are the principal rhetorical concerns of the data viz visualizations from that case study. And then, right, it's kind of like a 2-part memo, so I would probably split that up into at least 2 sections, the memo, and then offer an ethical critique for at least 1 data visualization. So from those 3 visualizations in the case study, you're first going to talk about all 3 of them. So what are the principal rhetorical concerns of them, and then choose one and offer an ethical critique of it. So, and this one, you do have to do the 2 responses. So the assignment is asking that you respond early so that you give yourself time to go back and offer responses, and also give your classmates a chance to respond to you. And this is the 3rd day. This is Sunday. So this is the 3rd day of the module week. So if you can get it in by today, that would be ideal, but you just don't want to post it like in the last 2 days of the module week, because you want to be able to allow people to respond to you and engage in that dialogue. And the response specifics are here, right? Offer replies about a rhetorical or ethical concern that your classmates may have overlooked, and your response should be, each of them should be about 75 to 100 words. And then the last assignment is the Viz redesign with a reflection memo. So in this one is probably the most complex assignment of this particular week. So again, you're going back to that case study, and it provides you the data as text, which looks like this. So it says, for the three visualizations, it gives you the data in text format. So you have that, and then, whoops, I don't know what I did. There we go. And then what you have to do is create alternative visualizations that exemplify the best design and ethics practices outlined in this week's readings in Chapter 3 and Chapter 6. And then it gives you some examples of the different platforms that you could use to create your 3 redesigns. So you may be familiar with some of these, you may not. If you're not familiar with any of them, I would just kind of use the ones that are underlined, because like I have like Adobe Illustrator, but I have that I have special permission to use it from the school. So you may not have access to that. Everybody usually has access to Excel. So just kind of look briefly through which ones. I would first figure out, like before you start playing around with the platforms, I would first identify how you want to create the alternative visualizations. Like first figure out, this could be done. You could write it out how you want, like what you want to do, and then kind of justify it, because that's kind of what you would do in your reflection memo, justify your choices. And then, or you can draw it out on a piece of paper. I kind of want it to look like this. So I would recommend doing that first. And then, because once you have an idea of what you want to do, and then you go into the different platforms, you'll be able to see which ones might work best for you depending on your aims in those alternative visualizations. So in addition to that, so what this should look like when you turn it in is you should have 3 visualizations that use the data from that case study. And then, that keeps happening, I don't know why. And then you have to talk about what you did and why. So that's that reflection memo. So I should see, okay, here are the 3 figures, and I would label them like figure 1, figure 2, figure 3. And then under those, have your reflection memo that outlines the changes you made and the rhetorical and ethical choices that support those changes. Your reflection memo should be in proper memo formatting. So you don't have to worry about the alternative visualizations, the 3 viz designs that you're going to do. Don't worry about memo format for that. Your reflection memos should always be in, any memo should always be in the memo format. And you want it to not exceed 250 words. So that includes all of the assignments for what this week has. It's kind of a lot, but just really briefly, I just kind of want to talk about like what are rhetorical choices? What do they mean? What are these? And so I'm presuming, though I may not be correct, that, or at least I'm hoping that you've all taken a composition course, whether it was at Embry-Riddle or somewhere else, but because usually in composition courses, and I've been teaching for over 15 years, and I've been teaching comp for all of those 15 years, in addition to other courses. But in every single composition class I've taught rhetoric. So that's why I'm saying I'm hoping that if you've taken comp A, I'm hoping that you've taken comp, and B, hopefully you talked about rhetoric in that composition class. So if we just consider like the word rhetoric is really like identified as kind of the art of persuasion. It's the choices, and I should even qualify that, the communicative choices we make when I've already said communicative. I was going to say when we communicate, but it's communicative choices we make. So, for example, and I try to use like easy examples so people can just get an idea of it. If I wanted to convince my husband that we should go to a play on a Saturday night versus, say, a football game, I would want to make certain communicative choices when trying to convince him of what to do. This sounds awful because I'd probably be like, let's just go to the football game. I don't care. But this is just an example. I would make certain choices in the way I would talk. So I would, kind of lay out, okay, well, I try to use examples like for, maybe the last 2 times we went out on a Saturday, we went to events that were really interesting to you, but they weren't really interesting to me, even though I was happy to be with you. And seeing this play means a lot to me because blah, blah, blah. So like my tone of voice would be a particular way. I wouldn't be like shouting at him or putting down football, if that's what, putting out something he likes, because that's going to alienate the person who's attempting to listen to my argument. So it's just, and hopefully, right, and then I would be providing that logic as well. So, the logic would be, well, the reason we should go to a play is, we've done the past several things we've done have been mostly for you kind of your interests. And so I think it's fair now that we do this, and maybe the show is only happening once. And so I try to pull in as many logical / statistical things that I could to try to make my argument more persuasive. But so rhetoric is anything we do to anytime we're communicating, you're using rhetoric, whether you realize it or not. But a step above that is rhetoric is often explicitly used as a way to persuade. So, and if you take in composition and talked about rhetoric, you should know that the reason we dissect rhetoric and do rhetorical analyses is because you're dissecting how are arguments effectively made, and then you yourself are writing, or in theory supposed to be writing, effective argument. So within rhetoric, there are mostly what's talked about is ethos, and I've already used the word ethos a few times in here, so I just want to make sure that everybody is on board with what that means. So ethos is credibility. It's really what we call the appeal to credibility. Logos is the appeal to logic, and pathos is the appeal to emotion. So when I say things like developing your own ethos as a writer, right, or presenter, if we're talking about presentations, when we're talking about ethos, and ethos comes from the term ethics, we're talking about credibility. So Gar Reynolds, in his presentation, for example, brings up, and he says explicitly, you might not believe me, but you'll believe this Harvard document that states X, Y, and Z. So he's doing a twofold appeal to credibility there. So first he's saying, I'm going to develop my own ethos as a presenter, my own credibility as a presenter, because I've done my research. Look at this Harvard article or journal or whatever it was, this Harvard document, right? So he's presenting quote unquote credible information. And then and it's credible, and we presume it's credible because it has the word Harvard attached to it. And the word Harvard has what we call cultural currency. And so it's, if you might just say, oh, it's from Harvard, so it must be true, or it's more credible than, say, another organization. So Gar in his presentation in a TED Talk, right, he's using Harvard to appeal to credibility and saying, here's why you should believe more about what I'm saying, because I've done my research and I know what I'm talking. And in providing that credible research builds his own ethos as a presenter, because it shows that he's developing credibility in choosing credible sources. So that's appeal to credibility, and it has to do with ethics and, do you have the right to talk about this? Do you have authority? Are you being fair? Are you not being biased? Are you being objective? Are you, and then our chapter 3, and I'll just go through this because I'll just address chapter 3 briefly, because it talks about that ethos, that writing ethically, and it gives these points about, recognizing unethical communication. And this is something that you guys have to be aware of, because you're talking about ethics in visualization, specifically data viz. So first it talks about plagiarism, which we should all know what that is, so I'm not going to go over it. The unclear and ambiguous language, that's always a problem. Manipulation of numerical information. And this is why I always tell people statistics don't mean anything, because people can misuse and misrepresent stats. So depending on how the stats were collected, who collected them, what was being asked, or what was the purpose of the collecting of the information, was it funded, was it unfunded, and then this kind of number comes out of it, or multiple numbers. And people always say, like, oh, statistics, they're just die hard, that's the truth. And I'm always like, there's no such thing as real statistics. Everything is kind of used for particular rhetorical purposes, most importantly. And so that has to do with that. But even a step below that in terms of ethics is when you manipulate that numerical information to meet your own rhetorical needs. So you can have appeal to credibility and fail at it. So you can be appealing to ethos, or have, the ethos appeal, but it fails, right? So it's not that you're using rhetoric and you're always being successful. It's like, well, you're using rhetoric and you're not being effective. So the other things that our authors mention is the use of, well, I'll just say misleading illustrations, which is specific to the assignments that you guys are working on for this week. The promotion of prejudice. So this is, being biased, being obviously biased, because I would always say that writing is biased. But the way we use rhetoric is we can be biased, but not necessarily show it. And that's one of the beauties of writing, is it's very deceptive. And that's due to things like rhetoric. Another thing is failing to make information accessible. Right, so you might, so maybe you're just like, yeah, 70% of Americans think blank, but then you don't follow that up with any information. It's kind of like, well, I don't believe anything you're saying, because you have no proof to help corroborate that statement. And then you have the uncritical use of information, which is kind of just throwing information around haphazardly. for the sake of throwing it around. It's not really grounded in anything, so it's not able to be substantive, and it is misuse of information. Or your reader or watcher or audience might be like, why are you giving me this information? That comes up a lot in writing, when you might quote from somebody, or paraphrase, when you're integrating evidence and you don't address the evidence. That's uncritical use of information, and it's very common in student writing. So that's some of the main things that that chapter goes into more detail. It talks about, what is ethical writing, but I think most importantly what it does is, especially in relationship to the assignments you have this week, is this idea of recognizing unethical communication. That I thought, and then each of these subsections in the textbook have longer, more in-depth qualification as to what they mean by that, and provide examples. But going back to these rhetorical appeals, so the appeal to logic sometimes the incorporation of statistics, but usually it's a line of logic, which oftentimes comes in implicitly or explicitly, an if this then that statement. And I'm just going to use a fake example. I'm just going to make some information up. But if I was trying to, I'll just go back to my terrible example of the play and the football game on a Saturday night. If we go to this play this weekend, then I will take you out to your favorite restaurant afterwards. That's a line of logic. So the person listening, in this case my husband, might be like, okay, so there's some logic here. The logic is, if I go to this place, I'll be able to go to my favorite restaurant. And maybe I hate that. Maybe I, like the wife, hates that restaurant. So I'm trying to appeal to logic, right? Or, there's going to be people we know at this play, and then we'll get to have time to socialize with them afterwards. That's an implicit if-then, because if you make it an if-then, right? If we go to this play, then we'll be able to meet up with some of our friends, and then we don't get to see them that often, right? So I'm trying to, that's a line of logic. I'm trying to appeal to that sense of logic, of, if you do this, then that. It's better. That's why when you hear political rhetoric is a big thing. So if you ever hear anybody say, 16% of this, or that's why, they talk about polling a lot and why polling numbers are important. And it's by this, if you, 75% of people voted for this person, so because of these reasons, then you're kind of thinking, well, then maybe I should also vote for, because if the numbers are so high, if this, then that. So that's logos. And then there's the appeal to emotion. So if I were, again, to use that same example of the play and the football game, if I wanted to appeal to emotion, I might say, like, I always, when we go to the football games, it's just, there's so many people, and, I'm really, I don't like being in large groups of people, and it makes me really uncomfortable, and, I want to support what you enjoy, and I do enjoy doing it every now and then, but I sometimes just need a break from it. That's me appealing to emotion. So I would be trying to get somebody to feel emotional about my argument. And these can all be very manipulative, which is why I said you can use them, and you can use them effectively, or you can use them ineffectively. But that's just, I don't want to go into all of rhetoric stuff. I just wanted to give you an idea, but it's, in terms of like rhetorical choices, it's really, the last thing I'll talk about is rhetorical intention. So why are you doing what you are doing? Or why are they doing what they are doing, right? So, and that has to do with so in the case of this week where you're looking at that case study, you're being asked to examine, well, when you're doing that rhetorical reflection assignment, you're being asked to say, well, what is it that they were doing? And what are some rhetorical concerns of that? And then you're also in the reflection memo for that more complex assignment. You yourself are then doing that same process just with your own work, right? Why did I do what I did? These are the reasons that I did it. So, and that's being aware of the rhetorical intentions. So, what's the rhetorical intention of a bar graph? What's the rhetorical intention of a line graph? What's the rhetorical intention of a pie graph? So these all have different rhetorical intentions, and rhetorical intentions can encompass things like who the audience is, what type of tone are you using when you're writing? What type of information are you choosing to present? Now, you don't have a choice in that because you're given the information. But you also need to be aware of the rhetorical context in which you're writing. So, and just as an example, as I was going through all the instruction manual early drafts, there were times when I would be saying, well, who's your audience for this? Because you said it was for, a novice or, somebody who's not really familiar with this, but it doesn't read like that at all. It reads like it's for an expert. And so that's the writer not being rhetorically aware of the rhetorical intention of the instruction manual. If this is meant to be for a particular audience, then it should be written in a particular way. So you always need to be aware of that. And the purpose of those reflection memos and any type of reflection is to engage in what we call recursivity, which is metacognition, or, okay, why did I do what I did? Versus, when you're looking at somebody else's work and describing what they were trying to do and what they did. But that's just kind of a little bit about rhetoric. It's a huge field, but I just wanted to give you kind of a little bit of insight to it because we don't have any specific conversations about rhetoric in the textbook explicitly. It's all very implied. It's just never there's not a concerted effort to talk about it, which makes sense because this isn't a composition class. So it's presumed that you've gone through that type of learning before. But that's all I've got for today. I just wanted to talk briefly about the assignments for this week and try to just provide some clarity in terms of everything that you're doing because there's so many different little things. And then feel free to contact me should you have any questions about anything. But otherwise, I hope everyone is having a great weekend, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.